Hello, I'm Diana Burns from Write, and we specialise in helping people to write and present winning proposals. We've been doing this for quite a number of years, and our experience and the research that we've done on this has taught us that there are some really key things that will lift your bids and tenders out of sight. And in these 3 videos, we're going to give you 3 key secrets that will really improve your proposals. So listen up, you're going to find this really useful. And here to discuss that with me is Richard Petrie, who's a top marketing consultant from Speed Marketing. Richard, welcome.
Thank you.
What is the secret? What really influences decision making?
Well, it's kind of interesting because most people, we all think we know what influences decision making, and usually it's around constructing a good logical argument. But the irony is that there's something else which plays a far bigger role in influencing decision making than we care to give it credit for, and that's emotions, the impact of emotions. And there's a good saying, people buy an emotion and justify with logic. So anyone that's done any sort of length of selling in the past intuitively tends to know this, but often when we get to tender writing, we go straight back to logic, which is one part of the brain, but it's not the powerful part of the brain.
You've compared this to an iceberg, haven't you? Can you explain that?
Well, maybe I can draw it.
That'd be great.
Yep. So, like I said, there's 2 parts to the brain, or this is an easy way to understand it anyway. The brain, if we look at it, is a bit like an iceberg, where like an iceberg, there's about 13% of the iceberg is above the surface of the water, which leaves about 87% below. Now it's a bit like the mind, and this is a bit like the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And most of our decision making, we operate above the surface and we think we understand this, which is the conscious part of the brain.
And that's the logic.
That's the logic. So that's logic. And we operate and we write our tenders and it makes perfect logical sense and we line up our argument and all that and we lose. And people wonder why they lose. Or even in their arguments with other people, they wonder why the other person's not being persuaded by their logical argument. And that's because this part of the brain, although you might be trying to influence somebody going that way, if the bit below the surface, the current below the water is going that way, it'll always overpower it. And I don't know if anyone can think of an example that probably brings it home, but logically maybe when you're buying a car, for a guy maybe, logically all they really need is a $2,000 car to get from A to B.
But they never want just a $2,000 car, do they?
No, they don't, but there's something else. But they won't justify why they bought the $20,000 car with the real reason, which would be it makes me feel cool or that type of thing. For ladies, it might be a handbag or shoes. Logically, logically they don't need anything very flash at all. But as we know, nice boots don't.
Thank you.
We end up, buying things we don't need and all that type of stuff. Now, there's a whole lot of, it's the emotions take over.
So what happens if people don't take emotions into account when they write their proposals or their bids?
Well, they don't form a connection. They're really only trying to influence the iceberg at the upper level of the surface. So it's a bit like a little person sitting on the iceberg trying to paddle in this direction over here. And you think, well, I'm on the iceberg and I'm paddling away, and you're wondering why you're going the other way. And that's because the current is going the other way.
The current of emotion is dragging in the other direction.
The current of emotion,
What about those people who are receiving the bids or the tenders? Do they just, because often they put out weighted criteria and they tell you the kind of things they're going to assess on, but is that all that's going on?
Oh, well, no, definitely not. I mean, that's how they start a tender process. I'm not saying in all cases, some tenders may be decided on purely logical, but I don't think many. I remember a case, it was a big bank that we were, I was younger and we were submitting a tender for. And we even got bought in and they showed us, they gave us the logical, here's our buying criteria and here's the weightings we've got for each of these things. Well, we went through the tender process and we didn't win. And I got invited back in by the procurement department to say, well, do you want to go through your tender? And I thought, well, not really, we didn't win, so I haven't got time for you to go through your weighting process and me feel bad. But anyway, I thought, oh, I'm curious, I'll go in. So I went in, met this guy, and he went through the whole tender criteria, and he worked out that we got third in terms of, all came up with a number and had a weighting, and we end up with this number. And he said, you guys got third. He said, but we didn't base it on the decision that the person who won the tender got fourth. And I thought, fourth?
Hang on.
Well, he said, we used that as a guide. I'm thinking to myself, well, if your criteria and your weightings is only a guide, what is the real criteria? Because it obviously wasn't what they'd written down, and it was the emotional factor. Once again, they'd made their decision based on emotion. They justified it with logic, but then they'd thrown logic out the window and just picked who they wanted.
So the emotion would be things like, we like these people, we think we're going to be able to work with them well. What other sort of stuff might be going on?
Yes, primarily that. A lot of people who are used to responding to big tenders know that if they don't have a prior relationship leading into the tender, they won't bother submitting one. Now, why is that? You may have the best criteria and response, but we just know if we don't have that relationship, we don't have a chance. And that relationship is it's emotion. It's what sort of emotional connection do I have with them? Because if we don't have one, even if we put in a good tender, we're not going to win it, and everyone knows it.
So it's all about getting that emotional connection, but I can just hear people watching us and thinking to themselves, but I can't come across all gushy and emotional in my proposal. How am I going to get that emotion in there when it's something like a infrastructure proposal, or something that's scientific?
Well, it may be scientific, but to the people usually running the bid, there's someone in there where it's emotionally important to them to get it right. They have got their jobs on the line. If they're doing it on behalf of a client, maybe a project management company, they've got to look good. The person's got to look good to their boss. If they make a mistake, then there's all that fear and all that type of thing. So it's seldom is it just logic. Seldom is it good logic. Now, how do you write in a more emotional way? Is you do have to have a prior relationship, I think, by and large, because you've got to know from them what are their emotional drivers. I've got to sit down with you at some stage in the process to find out what is the logical reasons why you want this project delivered well, and what are the emotional reasons why you want this project delivered well.
But sometimes you don't get a chance to meet in advance, do you? Sometimes you just haven't had an opportunity to meet them.
Correct.
So what can you do to get that emotional connection and find out about them if you don't know them personally?
Then you have to guess. And that's a lot harder.
But you can research too, can't you?
You can do your research.
There are clues out there.
There will be, and there might be stuff in the newspaper. There might be comments they've made within the copy, and if you're only looking for the logical answers, you might run over it. You really got to be a detective and put on your emotional driver's glasses. And sometimes they'll put it in the tender, and people will skim over it and not really give it its due credit. Whereas that is the key. That is the hot button.
Don't you think too that the trick with emotion is also being able to really put yourself in the shoes of that other person?
Yes.
So that you can think, if I were in their position, what would be the sort of things driving me? What would be the kind of things I'd be concerned about?
That's a really good point, because and that's what everybody should do. They should be trying to put themselves in the position of the buyer, and actually not only think like they think, but see if you can put yourself in a position where you can feel like they would feel if they're in that position.
And that's the key, isn't it?
That is the secret. So if I've got a prior relationship with you and I know, it's a bit easier for me to sit in your seat and try and feel how you're feeling around the risks and the opportunities within this project. If I don't know you, I've got to take all the data I can find and understand anything that's been written, and I have to create, sometimes we call it an avatar. So we'll create an avatar of something that represents that buyer or that set of buyers, and we'll create it into one specific person, and then we'll step in there and we'll start asking ourselves a whole lot of questions from here, and we'll answer them.
So you might say, rather than creating an avatar on screen, you might actually say, okay, you're Henry and you work in such and such a company and you're this kind of person, and then you can ask Henry questions and find out a bit about how Henry thinks. You have to sit there, and it might be you asking me, but I'm pretending I'm the person who is the key buyer decision maker, and then I sit there and answer the question. I try and become that person for 10 minutes. You ask me the questions and I'll give you answers based on how I think I would if I was him. And it is, there's an exercise called the instant empathy exercise, where you'll write down the age of the person, the sex, their beliefs, where they hang out,
so their social type thing, their values. If you can find these things out or guess them, and more, right? And their situation in life, are they married with 2 kids, man, woman, and then just sit down in the office and be that person for 5 or 10 minutes and have someone ask you key questions and answer them emotionally, logically, but also emotionally, and you'll be surprised.
And that's the key, isn't it? That's the secret that we're talking about here. Getting beyond just the rational to the emotional.
Correct. Getting down here and understanding how this takes. Now, if you can sit there with a person, get to know them, then you can ask them these questions if you've got good rapport. If you haven't, you have to do a bit of diagnosis on some of the criteria of who they are, and then someone sits there and becomes that person. It's kind of I know it's a weird thing to say, sit there and do it, but it's incredibly powerful.
Sometimes people say to me, well, I'm not an actor, I can't do role play. But it's more than role play, isn't it? You're talking about empathy, you're talking about learning how to feel rather than just think.
It's how to feel, and it's exactly what top actors do. I think it's called, what's the term they get into? Method acting. Correct, method acting. So what they do is they research the character, they go through, and then they step in and they become that character. And then they start giving responses as if they are that character. And they talk about getting in touch and feeling that character and being that character. And their whole personal self goes out the back, and they become that person. They make decisions, they act, they move, they think like that person. And it's almost like a mind reading exercise that can be done.
Or a heart reading exercise, because we're talking about feelings.
Yeah. And as they're saying, it shouldn't be hard sell, it should be heart sell. But you've got to connect with that person at that level. If you can, it's a huge advantage.
Would you say, Richard, because in our experience, one of the things we see in many of the proposals that we help people with is that they have done all of the rational thing really well, but they've actually been a bit scared of the emotional side of it.
Yes.
Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. And yet, if they were talking face to face with someone who they knew and they were really trying to help, they wouldn't talk to that person the way they've just written their tender document. Because
they wouldn't include the emotion.
They would. They'd bore the living pants off that person if they spoke the way they wrote. Okay, and I know you guys are experts in this, but the key is often write how you would write if you were sitting face to face with them and you were
talking to them.
And you were doing it for their benefit because you genuinely wanted to help them out. You would speak to them in a different way than you would if you were just trying to write down a whole lot of, and you were coming from the heart. You were trying to help them at that level as well, and it comes across completely differently.
So let's sum up. This first secret that we're giving people to lifting their proposals out of sight is?
Well, connect with them emotionally. Connect, and as simple as that, connect with them emotionally.
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome.